Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Horror Score. We're your hosts, Jesse
and Vanessa.
And this week's episode is...
Brahms, The Boy 2.
Let me tell you, we just watched The Boy 1 right before watching The Boy 2.
It was my first time watching. Loved it.
Yeah, it was my second viewing. I do like the first movie. But this is not a review of the first movie. But we're going to mention the first movie a bunch of times.
It got me very excited to watch this movie.
I don't hate this movie. Did you hate this movie? We're going to get into that, I guess. So what we have here is a family moves out to the country to get away from a trauma that they had in the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Which has never been done before in a horror movie.
That was actually a pretty scary part of the movie, I think, as far as what was the scariest part of the movie? Maybe the first 10 minutes.
The beginning, yeah.
The trauma that the family shared that leads them to moving to the country for a little while.
Very well shot. There was a burglary.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It was like, I was like, oh, okay.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was spooky.
Yeah.
There's a scene of her coming down the stairs.
Yep, with the burglar. With the
Behind,
mask.
through the stairs.
Yeah, I was already scared. Yeah. But, and then they get out to the country.
Yeah, then there was the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and he finds a doll in the woods, and I'm like, how are they going to continue the first movie? Because I liked it. I liked the first movie. I liked the twist, and now I'm thinking to myself, like, they can't use that formula again.
Where do they go from here?
Yeah, they're not going to fool us a second time. And
do you just want to jump into story?
For story, I appreciate and like a lot of things that they did or tried to do. Now, this movie suffers from PG-13 syndrome, as all the cool stuff you want to see in horror movies, not really there. All they can do is be a little spooky. So they rewrote the first movie. Things that we thought were true in the first movie turn out to not be true by this one, or there's some more behind-the-scenes stuff. I gave it an 11 because I liked it. I liked what they did. I didn't like every decision they made, but I appreciated it. And I think that the things I didn't like about this movie weren't necessarily because of the story. What about you?
I gave it a 7.
Okay.
It was weak. There was a weird half-told history that never fully got explained. No real intrigue.
There was a little intrigue, just a little bit.
I was not intrigued.
They're saving that for The Boy 3. If there's a Boy 3, I'll watch it.
The Boy 3, the girl.
And if we could talk about the villain. So you want to take us into villain? What do you think of the villain?
So the doll itself, just as it was in the previous movie, still is a creepy form. And then it gets really bad. It gets really, really bad. They ruin the villain. If there's like the boy in a Macy's parade, they just fired a bunch of holes into it, and then it deflated and fell on the ground because they couldn't just let it still be good.
Well, yeah, we don't see the villain from the first movie, the boy. We don't really know what happened to him. We just found out that, like, he's maybe dead, right? Like, he's gone. He's not around anymore. I gave the villain an 8 because a creepy doll that doesn't talk, that you don't really see move, can only get you so far. And plus, he's a little doll, right? So, like, people are like, well, Chucky's a good villain, and he's a doll, and that's true, except for the new Child's Play remake.
Which we won't get into.
Which we won't get into, but we might someday.
I gave it an 8 also, and he looks like Baby Groot.
He looks like Baby Groot. What do you mean? Oh, I know what you mean. You'll have to watch the movie. We try to not give any spoilers here. But, yeah, there was a lot of things about the first movie that turned out to not be true by the second movie. They kind of do. I thought that they were doing like an Evil Dead 2 thing where they were like, you saw the first movie.
Oh, like where they made it way better?
No.
Embraced the campiness?
No, it's... But where
created
they were
one
like,
of the greatest horror films of all time.
They kind of changed some of the things about the first movie that you just watched, because by Evil Dead 2, they're like,
they're not. Like, it wasn't a group of people.
Yeah, it's not 5. It was just 2.
No.
Yeah, so they made some changes.
Horror.
All right, let's move on to horror then.
What did you think about the horror of this film?
All right, you can only do so much with the PG-13. You can get the ambiance. You can get a great score going. You can have deaths without showing graphic gore on screen. Oh, this movie, no deaths. That's right, nobody dies in this movie. There's some ambient creepiness from time to time, but I think you get 3 or 4 jump scares. But I think that no deaths in a horror movie is unexcusable.
It's a crime.
Yeah, it's unexcusable. So I gave it a 7. The beginning is scary. That home invasion, probably the scariest part of the movie. About an hour in, you get another good little bit. But what about you?
I think the scariest part of this movie, again, was the opening scene. I thought that was great and well done. But also the groundskeeper, Joe, I think he tried to carry on his shoulders a lot of the creepy factor of this movie was just kind of pinned on him, and he did a great job for being the only actor in the company. Katie Holmes is in this, by the way. And I just have to say that Stephen King has said that big name stars have the power to ruin horror films because you know that this director isn't about to kill Katie Holmes. Like, so you don't have a lot of fear for, like, is this person gonna make it out of it? You see a no-name person and you've got a lot of fear that, like, that person might die. I've never seen that person before in my life. They're basically expendable as far as an actor goes. So when I saw Katie Holmes, I kind of got that same feeling of, oh, well, they're not going to kill her. But yeah, the groundskeeper, Joe.
It's nice when a movie does that, like swerves you, where you're like, that person's not going to die. They're going to be here till the end credits. And then movies like Burn After Reading, you're like, oh.
Yeah, right.
Oh, oh my. Yeah. So
I gave it a 9.
Okay.
Because it was nothing we haven't seen before. There's really nothing new or groundbreaking or in the horror department.
All right, well, I think that takes us to effects.
I'm just gonna say Baby Groot again, and the music was boring. Usually if, like, there isn't a lot for me to hang on to effects wise in a movie, there's usually some great, like, ambient music or something, but there wasn't. The music was bad through the whole thing, and so I gave it an 8.
If we're looking for things to, like, grab onto, in the beginning of the movie, the boys' bedroom has a awesome mural. Like, there's like, demon clowns all over the place. I thought it was going
to come back into the story.
Yeah, great mural.
I was disappointed.
There were some good transitions. There were parts where I was like, oh, that was really cool. That was a neat transition. So some of the cinematography, pretty solid. But as far as any other effects, like the sets are like, well, it's their house, and then there's just the woods. There's this old abandoned house from the first one. Not a lot. And since there's no deaths, there's no room for some cool practical effects.
So there was one death.
Yes.
And it was a dog.
Yes.
And it's not like an on-scene death. You don't see the dog being killed, but you do see the dog's, like, bloody, dead, poor body. So if you don't want to see that, don't watch the movie. And you won't have missed much.
But I gave effects a 7 overall. And speaking of effects, we could have got the kid a teleprompter. Because something that really bothered me in the movie is the child, after the trauma, chose to not speak. So every time through the whole movie, when the parents talk to this child, we have to wait for the kid to do this. And it just wears on you, because the kid's got a lot of lines, and he's, like, actually writing. And it wore me down.
And maybe that was, like, a tool that they were like, now you can see how worn down these parents are, how irritated. If by getting the audience to really, really want that kid to knock off the writing thing and speak, maybe they can understand where these parents are coming from.
These parents become the unreasonable movie parents at one point, where they have a kid. The whole family has had this terrible trauma, and the kid, as a result, does not speak. But at one point, they find one of his stuffed animals ripped open. And they're like, did you do this? And he's like, no. Oh, he doesn't say no. He writes it out that he didn't do it. And they're very mad, and they punish him. They make him, like, go to bed without dinner, and they They yell at him, and it's this big thing where like it was a rip. Like, what parents of like what child, especially with this trauma situation they're living in, who this kid's going to therapy, and they like blow up at him over this stuff.
They were like, I think Katie Holmes makes her point about how what's next, like animals. She's viewing this as like early serial killer kind of behavior, which is kind of funny to me, that like a ripped up teddy bear could be blown into my child's a monster. But anyway, let's get into the yes factor.
Our final category, which again we have borrowed from Doomsday Preppers, where we get to give this movie a couple additional points, anywhere from 0 to 20 for whatever reasons we want to. What'd you give it for extra points?
I give it an 8 because burglaries are really boring to me usually, but this one was great.
All right. I appreciate all the efforts they made in reimagining the first movie and adding some more lore into the first movie. I know you don't agree with me, but I gave it 8 more S Factor points for their efforts and what they did. I think not all of the new mythos that they added to was good, but some of it was, and I think if you get the right writers on board and you make The Boy 3, it can definitely be better than The Boy 2, and I'll watch it. I'll give it another watch. Well, I guess before we total up these scores, we're going to move to Vanessa's one-sentence synopsis.
I think you in particular are really going to like this one-sentence synopsis.
I can't wait.
Like any terrible sequel, this movie undermines the whole world that the previous film took 90 minutes to build.
So we get to our combined totals. Me, I give this movie a grand total of 41 horror score points. What about you, Vanessa?
I gave it 40, and I must have been feeling really generous.
Okay, well,
reviewing.
We're pretty close then. We had drastically different opinions of this movie, but using our scoring system, that gives us an average of our two scores as a 40.5. And again, as always, that is not an F. You might think it's an F, but it's not an F. It's not, I mean, yeah, it's 40 out of 100, but these are 40 and a half horror score points. There are 40 and a half reasons to maybe check out the movie, or maybe not. Maybe we said something that made you say, I don't need to watch this sequel. But if you give us 15 minutes, we might save you 2 hours.